For today, we will talk about local and global communication in multicultural settings. What are the things that should be done and the things that you should know whenever you are communicating in local and global setting? We have mentioned in previous lesson that we have different communication styles, which is also applicable in different multicultural contexts. And taking that, we have here the Cartesian, which includes the direct, spirited, systematic, and considerate communication styles developed by Dr. Aileen Russo. Each style has two dimensions: assertiveness level and emotiveness level, or expressiveness. So for spirited, it is high expressive plus high assertive. For considerate, that is high expressive plus low assertive. For direct, that is low expressive plus high assertive. And for systematic, that is low expressive and low assertive. We all have communication styles. Some of us are very direct, others are very expressive. Some of us are highly assertive and others are less assertive. The problem is we communicate in our preferred style. In other words, if our preferred style is to be very direct, then we communicate in that style, even if the person we're talking to doesn't like to be communicated with that style. Dr. Aileen Russo developed this matrix which highlights the different styles, starting with low expressiveness on the left and leading to high expressiveness on the right. Then she has low assertiveness at the bottom and high assertiveness at the top. And it is important to understand which style is yours, for you to also understand your co-worker's style. It is needed for us to understand our co-worker's style or colleague's style for us to have this effective communication. By understanding if they're direct, spirited, systematic, or considerate, you can adopt your communication style to match the way they like to receive the information. Thus, the greater information will be retained. Okay, so sa dimensions natin, yung expressiveness has something to do with how you express yourself. So this is emotional. Kapag ka naman assertiveness is how you direct other people to do a certain task. So let's have this HRDQ style model and its characteristics. For direct communicators, they use direct speech. So whatever they want to say, they will say it to you right away. And they use loud tones. When it comes to body language, firmness, or yung mga nakikita nyo na strict yung galawan. Then personal space, they keep physical distance. Most of the time, these direct communicators are the leaders. They keep distance from all other people. They want to work alone. And then, they present positions strongly. Kaya naman sila din yung rarely nakikinig sa positions ng iba. For spirited naman, they are persuasive. From the word spirited, exaggerated yung energy nila. And they have lots of voice inflection, as well as enthusiastic whenever they are moving or their actions. Some of them have cluttered workspace, pero para sa kanila organized yun. They understand whatever they are doing when they are working in their cluttered workspace. And they tend to be a good storyteller. Sila yung madaming kinukwento with exaggeration na din pag minsan. And that way makes them poor listeners. For considerate communicators naman, they use supportive language or yung empathetic way of saying words. Yung pleasing words ang kanilang forte. And then they have soft tones compared to enthusiastic and direct or strong ng direct communicators. Then they use gentle handshake just to show also that they are with you whenever you are experiencing misfortune. And then they carry sentimental items. Sila yung mga hoarders. And they are also good listeners. Systematic communicators naman, they use precise language. Paano po naging precise language yun? Because they take every action based on certain evidences. And they do have even delivery. Not high and not low when it comes to delivery. And then they avoid touching as much as possible. Because if you don't need anything from me, then don't come near me. That's their principle. And then they have the tidy desktop because they are systematic and organized. And they seek information before believing in a certain word. So they trust actions rather than mere words. Each style has its flip side of the traits, and these are your blind spots traits. If your strengths are carried to their extremes, it is good to be aware of your blind spots to help balance your strengths. And as you review this, ask yourself, what can I do to limit these behaviors? For direct communicator, they are poor listener. Why? Because they tend to say what you need to do. So most of the time, they won't listen to others' opinion. While spirited, since they do have this high expressiveness, they tend to exaggerate details to the point that you will no longer believe in them. For considerate, they tell others what they want to hear. So they are a good listener as well, pero they are also telling others, whether direct or indirect, what they want to hear from you. Because they are asking questions. Asking questions in some point or some questions might be uncomfortable for the one they are talking to. For systematic naman, they focuses too much on details. Sila din yung mga perfectionists. Kaya, detail by detail, tinitingnan talaga nila kung ano yung purpose nun kung para saan yung isang detail. Just a reminder here, your dominant style is the one that feels the most natural to you when you are enjoying your work or life. But it doesn't mean that it will be definite all throughout your life. You can be direct now, then you can be considerate in the next chapter of your life. Every other style is unique. Thus, nothing is superior and nothing is inferior. The best sense have representation of all styles. Hindi yung lahat sila direct. Because out of the strengths and weaknesses of each other, we will build a good product. It helps to know your trouble spots and practice improving. And there will always be a room for improvement. It doesn't mean you are a poor listener now. You can't improve your listening skills to have more successful interchanges. A link on how you're going to assess your communication style. Then, ito yung result for me. Based on that, I am an analyzer. Then you can also use it for you to know your communication style. It will also prompt you to the characteristics of your communication style, as well as famous people who also have the communication style. Right now, how are you going to improve yourself if you have this communication styles? For direct communicators, make an effort to listen carefully to others. It's not just you who has the idea. Brainstorming is a must whenever there is a group activity. Allow time for chatting at the beginning of a meeting to lighten up the mood para mas maging open ang members or yung colleagues mo sa'yo. Recognize that others may also feel the need to express themselves. And recognize that brainstorming can be effective and it's not a waste of time. Take some time to show your appreciation for others' contributions. For spirited, respect decisions and agenda that have been agreed upon, as well as time limits during meetings or any communicative situation. It's not just you who need attention in a certain situation. So you should take into consideration the agenda. Try to limit sharing your personal anecdotes that may take the discussion off topic. Don't tell stories when you're not asked because it will distract your groupmates or your colleagues. Make sure you are allowing others to contribute their ideas and suggestions and that you are genuinely listening to them. Since you do have this high level of energy, then you tend to listen to your stories only. So if you do have this opportunity to listen to others, do it genuinely. Be certain that any request you make is clear and that you convey the reason for such request. Hindi yung nag-request ka, hindi malinaw. If you are going to give your request to a certain group, make sure to it that you will clarify for you to get also the result that you want. Communicate your appreciation for others' work and input. This also goes to other communication styles. We should communicate appreciation for others' work and input. If you do have this considerate communication style, here are the tips. First is recognize that other people's opinions about a topic are separate from their opinions about you. Why? Because considerate communicators tend to take everything personally. So keep in mind that their opinion about the topic is different from their opinion about you as a person. Second, realize that not everyone is comfortable discussing personal topics with colleagues. As I've mentioned earlier, considerate communicators get what they want through asking questions, which might be uncomfortable for the other side. Allow others to open personal matters before asking questions of that nature. It's also a form of respect. If others don't want to open up a certain scenario to you or to open up a certain story to you, then don't force them to open to you by asking questions, by asking uncomfortable questions. Respect your own opinion as you respect that of others. It's not just your opinion that matters in the situation. Others' opinion also matters. And recognize that you don't have to be friends with everyone, but you should treat others and be treated professionally. Because most of the time, considerate communicator take in whatever is given to them without thinking that they also deserve something better. For systematic, recognize that for good working relationships, consideration for others' feelings is important. So it's not just based on details. You should also take into consideration the feelings of your colleagues. Then learn to ask qualifying questions that will help you get the information you need rather than investigating and observing all the time. Because in some cases, you will get the information you need by asking. And make sure you understand the background of the discussion or scope of the conversation so no time is wasted. Politely ask questions about themselves if you want to build rapport, because systematic communicators tend to be loners because they don't know how to communicate or how to reach out to others because they have all they need in their circle or they can seek whatever they need without asking others. But there's nothing wrong with building rapport with others. If you need to ask for more time to know, analyze or discuss something, explain the benefit of that information you need to know rather than assuming that you already know it. Now we will move to varieties and registers of spoken and written language. So what are language varieties? These are also called lex, which refer to the different variants of a language that can be sufficiently delimited from one another in terms of social, historical, geospatial factors, thus forming language clusters. In social linguistics, language variety, also called like as a general term for any distinctive form of a language or a linguistic expression. Linguists commonly use language variety as cover term for any of the overlapping subcategories of a language. Pidgin, Creole, regional dialect, minority dialect. So let's have Pidgin. Pidgin refers to a new language that develops into situations where speakers of different languages need to communicate but do not share a common language. Examples are Chavacano in the Philippines and Bismala as a language spoken in Vanuatu. We can consider Pidgin as a social lek because that is created out of the need to communicate in a society. Pidgin doesn't have native speakers. It is sort of a compromise between two different languages or between multiple languages. Pidgin arrives very suddenly and very quickly when there is a need to communication in a certain situation, and the inferior group needs to learn to communicate with the dominant group. Thus, they adopt a sort of simplified language based on the most basic vocabulary of that dominant group and based on the most basic grammar of their own native language. Just like in situations in trade, slavery, or colonial contact. Pidgin is technically created out of the need to communicate with the co-workers. That's why ginagamit lang siya sa workplace. Once na ito ay ma-carry on na sa family ng isang worker, it will now be called as extended pidgin. This extended pidgin has the possibility to be a Creole. Then we have Creole. Creole is a pidgin that becomes the first language of the children or the mother tongue of a certain community. Examples are the Gula and the Patwa in Jamaica. From pidgin na sinasalita lang siya ng isang community for the need to communicate with each other, naging Creole ito. Which is yun ang kinalakihan naman nung sunod na generation. Once ang pidgin ay naging mother tongue ng isang generation, then it will be considered as Creole. Let's take for example Chavacano.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Lang Focus channel and my name is Paul. Today's topic is the Chavacano language, a Spanish Creole. In fact, the only Spanish-based Creole language in Asia. The name of the language comes from the Spanish word Chavacano, meaning vulgar or in poor taste. That's because Chavacano was originally considered incorrect or corrupted Spanish. Chavacano is spoken in the Philippines and is a direct result of the Philippines' history as a Spanish colony. It's not spoken by the majority of Filipinos, but by a minority living in specific areas. It's spoken in different varieties, in Cavite, a province just south of Metro Manila, in Cotabato, on the island of Mindanao, Basilan Island, to the south of Mindanao, and it's spoken by the largest number of speakers in Zamboanga, especially Zamboanga City, on Mindanao. It's notoriously difficult to find consistent statistics about the number of Chavacano speakers, but according to the United Nations Statistics Division, in 2005, there were 431,000 native speakers, including around 311,000 in Zamboanga. But those numbers underestimate the number of people who speak Chavacano. Zamboanga City, a city with over 1 million people, is a very diverse place with migrants from all over the Philippines, and Chavacano serves as the most common lingua franca. So hundreds of thousands more people speak it as a second or third language. So what is it exactly? Is it Spanish? Well, not exactly. It's a Spanish-based Creole, meaning that Spanish is the lexifier language, the language that supplied most of the vocabulary, while the grammar is largely based on Filipino languages like Visayan, Tagalog, and Hiligaynon. The Spanish colonial period in the Philippines began in 1521, and beginning in 1565, the Philippine Islands began to be administered from the Viceroyalty of New Spain, which was based in Mexico City. This continued until Mexico's independence in 1821, after which the Philippines were administered directly by Spain. But for those 256 years, Philippines had significant interaction with New Spain and its people. During this time, the Philippines and New Spain were connected by the galleon trade, large trading ship voyages that made the journey between Manila and Acapulco once or twice a year. This brought Filipinos in contact with Spanish-speaking workers from New Spain. While soldiers and settlers from Spain were present, soldiers and settlers from New Spain also arrived in significant numbers. One place where many newcomers settled was in Zamboanga, which the Spanish seized in 1635 in an attempt to stop attacks by Moro pirates. They established a fortress called Real Fuerza de San Jose, Royal Fort of St. Joseph. The population of this fort had a direct impact on the development of the Chavacano spoken in Zamboanga. There were Visayan warriors from Cebu and other areas, Spanish soldiers, including those from Spain, Mexico, as well as Peru, and Jesuit priests who served as Spanish Visayan translators and might have taught the others how to communicate, resulting in a pidgin language that would become the Chavacano Creole. This fort was eventually abandoned, but some of the population remained and continued to interact with locals, while the Jesuit priests continued their conversion efforts. This both spread Chavacano and brought additional influences to the language, making it a little more Filipino and a little less Spanish. This is the kind of contact that resulted in the creation of other forms of Chavacano as well, but the exact influences were somewhat different. For example, the Chavacano spoken in Cavite has more Castilian Spanish influence and less Mexican Spanish influence, and has more Tagalog influence rather than Visayan. Now let's look at some features of Chavacano and see how it differs from Spanish. I'm focusing mainly on Zamboangueño, the Chavacano Creole spoken in Zamboanga. We'll start by focusing on the syntax, and I'll introduce additional elements as we go. While Spanish is generally SVO, Chavacano is generally VSO, like Tagalog or Visayan. Here's a sentence meaning, the man looked at Jose. In Spanish,
El hombre miró a José.
And in Chavacano.
Y mirá el hombre con José.
In Spanish, the subject, el hombre, comes first, but in Chavacano, it comes after the verb. There are some other important things we can notice about this sentence. The verb miró, from mirar, means look in Spanish, while in Chavacano it means both look and see. So depending on the intended meaning, the Spanish translation might be
El hombre vio a José.
using a different verb to mean see. Also notice that the verb forms are slightly different. The Spanish verb is conjugated for the third person singular conjugation in the preterite or past historic tense, but Chavacano verbs are not conjugated at all. The verb mirar will be the same for any subject. The only thing that can change is this extra little piece right here, which is a preverb that shows tense. Ya indicates past, ta indicates present, and I indicates future. These are not always used, but can be used for clarity and for emphasis. Also notice that Chavacano uses con instead of a. Con comes from the Spanish word con, meaning with, but in Chavacano it's used as the object or accusative marker. So already we can see a number of differences between Spanish and Chavacano. Another example. Here's a sentence meaning you teach children, you being the plural form. In Spanish,
Ustedes enseñan a niños.
and in Chavacano.
Ta-enseña ustedes na mga bata.
Again, in Spanish, the subject comes first, and in Chavacano, it comes after the verb. And you'll notice the present tense preverb ta before the verb. Na is a locative particle, or preposition, which shows direction or location. Apparently, it comes from Asturian. And note the difference in vocabulary for the words meaning children. In Chavacano, you'll see the phrase mga bata. Mga is a plural marker found in Tagalog, Visayan, and Hiligaynon. In Chavacano, this is sometimes used as the plural marker, and the Spanish plural form with s or es is sometimes used. Another example. Here's a sentence meaning I love you. In Spanish,
Yo te amo.
or,
Te amo.
and in Chavacano,
Amayo contigo.
or.
Ta-amayo contigo.
This time, the Spanish sentence is SOV, not SVO, because when the object is a pronoun, it usually comes before the verb. But in Spanish, the subject pronoun can be dropped because the person and number are clear from the conjugation of the verb. In Chavacano, however, verbs are not conjugated, so the subject pronoun is necessary. And notice that the preverb ta is optional. Earlier, we saw that con, meaning with in Spanish, is used as the object marker in Chavacano. Here, contigo, which means with you in Spanish, is used as the object pronoun. All of the subject pronouns of Spanish origin have an object pronoun equivalent like this that begins with con. There are other subject pronouns of Filipino origin, and their corresponding object pronouns are also of Filipino origin. Some pronouns might come from Filipino languages because they communicate something that the Spanish pronouns couldn't communicate. Notice, for example, the first person plural pronouns kame and kita, which come from Visayan. Some Austronesian languages, including some languages of the Philippines, distinguish between the first person plural inclusive of the listener and exclusive of the listener. Another example. Here's a sentence meaning, this is Pablo. In Spanish,
Este es Pablo.
and in Chavacano.
Si Pablo este.
Again, in Spanish, the subject comes first. It's the demonstrative pronoun este. In Chavacano, it comes after the predicate. And you can see that the pronoun is abbreviated, but it's not always so. There's actually no verb in this sentence because Chavacano has no copula. So the word order is really predicate-subject. The word si is a subject marker for personal names, which is also found in Tagalog, Visayan, and Hiligaynon. In Spanish, demonstrative pronouns have gender, but Chavacano has no grammatical gender. So for a female name, in Spanish it would be like this,
Esta es Trisha.
with a change in the pronoun, while in Chavacano it would be this,
Si Trisha este.
with no change in the pronoun. Another element of the word order that is different is that adjectives come before nouns in Chavacano, not after. In Spanish, we have
Hora libre.
meaning free time, and in Chavacano, we have
Libre hora.
another sentence. Here's a sentence meaning I love their house. In Spanish,
Yo amo su casa. Amo su casa.
and in Chavacano.
Ta-amayo di ila casa.
Again, notice that in the Spanish sentence you can drop the subject, but in Chavacano you can't. The third person plural possessive pronoun in Chavacano is diila. The possessive pronouns typically consist of di prefixed to the beginning of the Spanish subject pronouns or to Filipino clitic pronouns. Another sentence. Here's a sentence meaning Juana or Jane bought a second dog. In Spanish,
Juana ha comprado un segundo perro.
and in Chavacano.
Ya comprawan ika-dos pero.
Again, we see the SVO versus VSO, we see the subject marker si, and a preverb in Chavacano. And we see the word for dog. There's one new thing to notice here. The ordinal number in Spanish is segundo, but in Chavacano it's icados. The cardinal numbers of Chavacano, like dos, are all basically the same as in Spanish, but with slightly different spelling. But while Spanish has different forms for ordinal numbers, Chavacano prefixes ica to cardinal numbers. Notice that the Spanish ordinal number primero is used, and other Spanish ones can be used in place of the Chavacano forms too. Segundo, for example. Now let's look at a couple more sentences and see what we find. Here's a sentence meaning the book will be published in 5 languages. In Spanish,
El libro será publicado en 5 idiomas.
word for word it's the book will be published in 5 languages. And in Chavacano,
El libro mansale na 5 lenguaje.
word for word it's the book, verbal prefix, come out in 5 language. In this sentence, we see that the subject comes first in both sentences. In Chavacano, SVO word order is possible. For example, it's often found in news stories that are translated from Spanish media, keeping the text as similar to the Spanish version as possible. Another thing is that in Chavacano, there's no passive form, so passive meaning is understood from context, or the action can be paraphrased. In Spanish, the sentence is explicitly future, but the Chavacano sentence doesn't have the future preverb I. It can have it, but here it doesn't. We see here that the verb is preceded by man. Man is a prefix that makes a verb distributive, meaning that the action is performed by several subjects or on several objects separately. Here, the book will be released separately 5 different times in 5 different versions, so man is used to show the distribution of the action among the different releases of the book. Man is also a prefix that can be attached to nouns and English loanwords to turn them into Chavacano verbs. Man translate, man picnic, man reply, etc. There's a similar prefix, mag, in Tagalog and Visayan. And notice that the word for languages in Spanish is idiomas, while in Chavacano it's lenguaje. In Chavacano and other languages of the Philippines, lenguaje is used to refer to languages that are spoken by communities of people, while in Spanish, lenguaje refers more to the general concept of language. So, to refer to a specific human language in Spanish, idioma is the typical word. And one last sentence. This sentence means they left without paying for the drink. In Spanish,
Se fueron sin pagar la bebida.
word for word it's reflexive particle. They went without pay the drink. In Chavacano,
Yasele sila nuay pagakunel tomada.
word for word it's past tense preverb, leave, they, without, pay, object marker, definite article, alcoholic drink. This last sentence is fairly different from its Spanish equivalent. First, notice that the verbs are different. In Spanish, we see the reflexive form of the verb ir, meaning to go. The reflexive form is used to mean leave. Chavacano doesn't have this construction, so another verb is used instead. It's a derivative of the Spanish word salir, meaning to go out. Sila is the third-person plural subject pronoun, which comes from Tagalog and Visayan. Nuay is a negative preverb for the past tense. Conel is a combination of con, the object marker, plus el, the definite article. Finally, we have the word tomada, which means alcoholic drink in Chavacano, while in Spanish it's bebida. Chavacano also has a similar word bebe, but that is a general word for a drink, not specifically an alcoholic drink. Before, I mentioned that Chavacano was influenced by Mexican Spanish. There was undoubtedly some influence on the pronunciation of Chavacano, and Chavacano also contains some vocabulary that clearly came from Mexican Spanish. For example, zacate, meaning grass. This is originally a word from Nahuatl, an indigenous language of Mexico. It entered Mexican Spanish as a loanword, and then entered Chavacano via Mexican Spanish. These words are also from Nahuatl. Changue, meaning market, which comes from tiangue. Chongo, meaning monkey, from chango. And camote, meaning sweet potato. There are other words and expressions that don't come from Nahuatl words, but are common to Mexico, and maybe have special usage in Mexico. In Mexico, when you want someone to repeat something because you didn't catch what they said, you ask, "Mande?" This is also used in Chavacano. I also hear that a lot of Chavacano swear words are of specifically Mexican origin, but I'll skip those for now. So, are Chavacano and Spanish mutually intelligible? Well, yes and no. Some Chavacano speakers have told me that they can understand around 60% or more of certain varieties of Spanish, in particular European Spanish and Mexican Spanish. But this is not necessarily true for Spanish speakers who hear Chavacano. While most Chavacano speakers are familiar with the word order of English and maybe the word order of Spanish itself, Spanish speakers are generally not familiar with the word order of Filipino languages like Tagalog or Visayan, so when they hear Chavacano, they might just hear a mishmash of Spanish words but be confused by how they're being put together in sentences. This is especially true for informal Chavacano, which has more influence from Filipino languages, whereas formal Chavacano is closer to Spanish. But probably with some basic exposure to the grammar, they could improve their comprehension of it quite quickly. Some people argue that Chavacano really isn't that different from other Filipino languages like Tagalog or Visayan, which contain a lot of Spanish vocabulary themselves. Chavacano just has a lot more of it.
Third natin ay regional dialect. It is not a language that is not distinct from a national language. That's why it's called as dialect. But rather a variety of language spoken in a particular area of a country. Examples are the Cebuano, Waray, Ilocano, and Hiligaynon. That means that this is geospatial. So it has something to do with location. The dialect in a certain location is different to another location. While minority dialect or the ethnolect na sinasabi natin is a variety used as a marker of identity, usually alongside the standard variety by the members of a particular minority or ethnic group. Examples are the Sinamov de Badjaos in the Philippines and the London Jamaican variety in Britain. Term na ginagamit natin for ethnic groups ay minority groups. Thus, we use the term minority dialect. But it's also the same with ethnolect or ethnic dialect. And then we have Endogenized Varieties. These are spoken mainly as second languages in former countries with multilingual populations. A classic example is Singlish or Singaporean English. In the Philippines, we do have our variety of English, which is the Philippine English, or yung mga napapansin ninyo na English Carabao. That is also accepted as a form or as a variety of English because that is qualified as part of the world Englishes. So, hindi porket English Carabao yung ginagamit niya, mali na kagad yung term, mali na kagad yung sinasabi. Because that is comprehensible within the Philippines. Philippine English and Singaporean English are the same when it comes to indigenized varieties because we are speaking English as our second language. Now we will be talking about language registers. It is characterized by the way a speaker uses language differently in different social circumstances. These are determined by such factors as social atmosphere, purpose of communication, audience, and the general context of the discourse. So generally, language registers can be classified as formal, casual, intimate, frozen, and consultative. Let's talk about it one by one. When we say formal, these are registers which are used in professional, academic, or legal settings, where communication is expected to be respectful, uninterrupted, and restrained to specific rules. Slang is never used, and contractions are rare. Examples are registers used in research paper, government documents, business letters, and business presentations. As you can see, yung formal language, it follows a strict standard when it comes to language. Then we have casual. These registers are used when communicating with friends, close acquaintances, colleagues, and family members. These are used birthday parties or family greetings. How you communicate with your friend is casual, which means this is a combination of standard and non-standard language. And conyo is part of the casual register. Intimate. Intimate language registers are reserved for special occasions, usually between only two people, or often in private. Examples are an inside joke between two high school friends or sweet nothings whispered to your special someone. Even your code names or your endearments. Frozen. It refers to historic language that is intended to remain unchanged. Examples are the registers used in the Philippine Constitution and the Holy Bible. It is called frozen because it is unchanged, but we can make an adaptation. Example, ang Holy Bible meron niyang different interpretations or meron tayong makikita na different books using different registers. Pero same pa din naman yung content sa Holy Bible. Lastly, we have consultative, which is used in conversations when people are speaking with someone who has specialized knowledge or is offering an advice. Tone is often respectful, such as the use of honorifics or courtesy titles, but may be more casual if the relationship between or among the communicators is friendly. Examples are registers used in local television, broadcast, or in a conversation with a doctor during medical examination. Even when you are talking to a psychiatrist, they do have the knowledge in a certain field and they are offering you an advice. Consultative because you are asking for consultation or for an advice from that person. Here are the examples wherein different registers are used to convey the same information. We regret to announce the death of, I am sorry to inform you that, unfortunately, I have to tell you that, did you know, and you know that man died, and oh no, he's dead. Here, they are expressing the same information that someone died, but they do use different words or different registers.
What is a language register? Language register is the level of formality with which you speak. There are 5 language registers or styles. Deciding which language is appropriate depends on your audience, topic, and situation. It is important to remember that different situations and people call for different registers. So what are the 5 language registers? Number 1, frozen or static register. These are specific written or oral acts that never or rarely change, hence the name frozen or static. Because they don't change, they sometimes include old grammar or vocabulary. They are cultural, usually related to the religions, laws, or customs of the community. They are usually unidirectional, meaning they don't involve back and forth communication. This type of language is often learned and repeated by rote memory. Some examples include biblical verses, prayers, national anthems, religious books, laws, famous speeches, and the Bill of Rights. Number 2, formal register. This language is used in formal settings and is one way in nature. It is impersonal and often follows a prescripted format. The speaker uses complete sentences, avoids slang, and may use technical or academic vocabulary. It is likely that the speaker will use fewer contractions but opt instead for complete words. For example, they use have not instead of haven't. This is the register used for most academic and scientific publishing. Examples of formal register includes business presentations, research paper, essays in schools, interviews, TED Talks, and announcements. Number 3, consultative register. It is a two-way communication used in a conversation. People use this register often in conversation when they're speaking with someone who has specialist knowledge or is offering advice. In other words, this is the register we use when consulting an expert such as a doctor. The language used is more precise and the tone is often respectful. Examples are teachers with students, lawyers talking to a client, doctor to a patient, superior to subordinate, and many others. Number 4, casual register. This is informal language used by peers and friends. Slang, vulgarities, and colloquialisms are normal. It's probably the one you think of when you consider how you talk with other people, often in a group setting. And since this is a group language, one must be member to engage in this register, like buddies, teammates, chats and emails and blogs, and letters to friends. Number 5, intimate register. This communication is private. It is the language used between persons who share a close relationship or bond. This register would take into account certain terms of endearment, slangs, or expressions whose meaning is shared with a small subset of persons. For example, lovers having special terms of endearment, mothers giving pet names to their children based on some character trait, and best friends formulating slangs based on some shared past experience. Intimate language may be something as simple as an inside joke between two college friends or a word whispered in a lover's ear. As a rule, one can usually transition from one language register to an adjacent one without encountering repercussions. However, skipping one or more levels is usually considered inappropriate and even offensive. So what is the importance of knowing when and how to move between registers? A speaker may move from one register to another with ease. For example, it is not uncommon for you to address your classmate casually and then adopt a more consultative register when speaking with your teacher. If one register is expected and another is presented, the result can be either that offense is taken or a comic response. For example, on the TV show Big Bang Theory, Sheldon's character often uses the higher consultative register with his friends, as well as everyone else. He sometimes seems stuck in the world of high-level vocabulary, unable to speak in the lower casual register that his friends use among themselves. The result is comedic. The audience laughs at his social awkwardness and inability to understand that he can and should adapt his speech to different contexts. It is important to understand the differences between registers so you can use language that is appropriate for a particular situation. If your register is too high, you may come across as being snobby, pretentious, or arrogant. If your register is too low, you can come across as being inappropriately informal or too friendly. Knowing what various registers are, how to differentiate between them, and when to use which one increases your chances of being accepted by groups and speakers in a variety of contexts.
And on this point, how can you improve your ability in communicating in multicultural setting? Everything should start with a personal desire and strong conviction to relate more effectively with persons having different cultural backgrounds. This will not only create positive personal relationships, but also open more opportunities for professional growth. Limiting one's reliance on preconceived notions and established stereotypes is also a major leap towards effective intercultural communication. And I will be presenting to you guidelines on how you can enhance your ability to handle situations involving intercultural communication and better prepare yourself to meet the communication challenges in an increasingly global environment. First on the list is make a personal commitment to develop communication skills appropriate in multicultural settings. Again, we need to have strong conviction, and it can be shown by making a personal commitment. So make sure to it that you really want to improve your communication skills. Otherwise, you will not be taking steps or you will not take risks in improving yourself. Make a personal commitment. Next is refrain from forming expectations based solely on your culture. You are preparing primarily to communicate with different people with different cultures. Thus, you should reserve your expectations if that is based solely on your culture. It is acceptable to make expectations if you will take into consideration their culture as well para magkaroon kayo ng compromised expectations. Because communication is a two-way cycle. Hindi siya magiging effective kung ikaw lang lagi ang ikaw-consider. You should also take into consideration the other party. Third is remove personal biases or any stereotype that may impede understanding. In Lesson 1, we've discussed about avoiding prejudice. It is also a step wherein you are removing your personal biases or any stereotype. Once you do have this stereotype or prejudice, someone who is bad will remain bad, or someone who talks ill will remain to talk ill, and everything that he will say will not be good for you. Then you will not be able to comprehend or accept whatever that person is going to say. If you want to be a good communicator, then you should open up your mind to possibilities. That will be all for today.